The mighty Indus River rises in the Himalayan mountains. It flows more than 2,000 miles across India and Pakistan before reaching the Arabian Sea. For thousands of years, the course of this river has been one of the routes by which immigrants have come to India. Some of the earliest immigrants settled in the fertile lands that bordered the Indus. They were the founders of one of the world's earliest and greatest civilizations, which prospered for more than 1,000 years and then mysteriously vanished and was lost to history. Towards the end of last century, engineers came to the Indus Valley to build a railway. When they unearthed vast quantities of bricks and rubble, they only regarded this find as a most convenient source of ballast on which to lay the tracks. It was a chance rumor concerning the discovery of small seals bearing strange writing that first directed the attention of the archaeologists to the ancient mounds of the Indus Valley. It was not until the 1920s that the archaeologists started to dig. They soon realized that they had started to uncover a totally unknown civilization. From this mound, they unearthed the remains of a great city which had flourished more than 2,000 years before the start of Indian history books. "4,000 years ago, this street was at the hub of a bustling, crowded, and noisy city. 3,000 years ago, it was abandoned." 1,000 years is a very long time in terms of Western civilization, more than the entire lifespan of the Roman Empire. The Indus civilization flourished for at least 1,000 years, but it faded from history and its people were forgotten long before the Roman Empire was born. In the Indus Valley is called Mohenjodaro, which means Mound of the Dead. The archaeologists were searching for ghosts buried deep within the mound beneath the dust and debris of thousands of years. The dig was long and difficult, but it was also rewarding. It revealed not just a primitive settlement or even a few hundred houses, but a vast enterprise in city planning. This city they had started to unearth was nearly a mile square and must have housed a population of tens of thousands. As the digging continued, a broad avenue came to light, running right through the center of the site. This city was obviously built to a master plan. 4,000 years ago, the city planners were already at work. This is First Street, Mohenjodaro, so called by the archaeologists because it runs broad and straight through the city for more than a mile. To excavate and care for this unique site is a colossal task, almost as great as the original building of the city. In 50 years, only a fraction of this great city has been unearthed, But as each new section has come to light, it has revealed the same grid pattern of narrow streets crisscrossing densely populated blocks. From street level, the layout is lost to view, obscured by the massive brick walls. This building has been identified as the house of a chieftain or governor. The sloping outer walls are several feet thick. The house once fronted onto an open square. All around were assembled the houses of Mohenjodaro's most substantial citizens. The more prosperous homes rose to 2 stories and had broad staircases built into the massive walls. Each house appears to turn its back to the streets of this well-ordered community. There is something almost sinister about these great blank walls, which seem to form a massive brickwork maze. But the ancient architects knew their job. They built houses which gave the best possible shelter from the burning heat of the long Indus summer. The individual was sheltered not only from the climate, but also from the noise and bustle of a teeming population. Each household faced inwards onto a private courtyard, which was a peaceful haven amid the crowded city streets. Exploring the anonymous, deserted streets today, the brick walls seem endless and overpowering. It's easy to understand why one historian has described it as 1984 BC. How regimented was the life of the Indus people? Was it the city planner's dream, or the city dweller's nightmare? The seat of power was the citadel, a kind of civic center which still dominates the entire city. And the focal point of the citadel was the great bath, surrounded by the college of priests and the halls of government. This complex was the very heart of Mohenjodaro, and perhaps of the whole Indus civilization, just as thousands of years later, the Acropolis was to be the heart of Athens, and the Capitol the heart of Rome. The cells of the priests were built round the bath, since ritual bathing was an important part of their ceremonial, a ceremonial which is still a part of Hindu life to this day. As in Egypt and Sumer, the priesthood of the Indus probably played an important role in the affairs of state. Great care was lavished on the construction of the bath. It was made watertight with a lining of bitumen, which was imported from its natural source by the river Euphrates, more than 1,000 miles away in ancient Iraq. The brick floor was laid on an incline, which also sloped to one side, draining the water to an outlet at the lowest corner of the bath. But the benefits of public works were not restricted to the ruling classes. All over the city, in the walls of house after house, are outlets linked to a comprehensive drainage system. Everywhere there are neat brick-lined channels following the intricate pattern of streets and side alleys. It's a technique which is still used today in many Indus towns. The quality of drains may seem a strange epitaph to a great civilization, but note that we take the word civilization from the Latin civis or civis, a city. The rulers of Mohenjodaro had tackled the problems of city life long before the Romans. Remember, the Indus civilization was as much ancient history to the Romans as Rome itself is ancient history to us. There's little doubt that if a Roman civil engineer could have inspected the ruins of this city, he would have been astonished by the technical skills of the Indus drain layer. Stones from the distant hills were carefully fitted over the larger drains and could be used as inspection covers. At intervals, a deliberate dogleg was built into the long drainage runs to check the flow. The well-known saying, "Cleanliness is next to godliness," might well have originated in Mohenjodaro. It was a crowded city in a hot climate. The people had obviously learned the importance of public health. Without drains, a civilized population could not survive. This is the reason why the building of efficient drains was considered to be at least as important as the construction of comfortable homes. In some quarters of the city, carefully built refuse chutes suggest a regular collection of garbage by gangs of municipal workers. Many of the upper floors once housed bathrooms. These were served by outlets hidden within the thickness of the outside walls. And this is a Mohenjodaro privy, or john. They were built to last, like the rest of the house. A bit hard on the seat, perhaps, but as compensation there were two of them, side by side. The mounds of the Indus Valley have yielded no sensational hoards of treasure, nothing like the tomb of Tutankhamun or the royal burials of Ur. The quality of the scattered relics which have been unearthed point to a remarkable civilization and prompt the question, who was the founder and planner of this city? There's no mistaking this magnificent bull. The artist has achieved an impression of enormous strength in this powerful beast, in a Stone Age carving literally the size of a thumbnail. Today, the Indus bull is still yoked to the plow by farmers whose distant ancestors once produced the agricultural wealth of Mohenjodaro. They used the same wooden plow. The Indus civilization was so mature for its early years that some of the ancient museum toys show how its technology has served unchanged for thousands of years, right down to the present day. Preserved beneath the mound, ancient tracks have been found which exactly fit the carts used by the excavation gangs today. The founders of Mohenjodaro showed great foresight when they decided to settle near the banks of the Indus. Their community prospered and became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Why then, after centuries of progress, did a complete civilization mysteriously disappear? One theory is that the life-giving river may also have brought death to the city by flooding. If we examine the ruins of the city, there is indeed evidence to suggest that fate. In some of the most substantial buildings, there are what appear to be chimneys, some of them, for no apparent reason, rising directly from the center of the houses. If we look closer and examine the brickwork round the top, the mystery is solved. These stacks are not chimneys at all, but wells, just like the other wells, the rims of which are level with the ground on higher parts of the city. It seems certain that devastating floods did occur, and that as a result, the city was rebuilt, possibly many times, to keep it above the flood level. At lower levels, where the earlier foundations became waterlogged, the walls finally started to decay. But they'd been so well built that the city was never washed away, and its people were able to rebuild on exactly the same site. Yet, for some reason, the quality of building declined, and the later houses, built well above the flood level, are mere slums compared with those beneath them. The massive city walls suggest that the population once faced a powerful enemy. There are legends describing the triumphant arrival of the Hindus, sweeping down the river valleys into India. The date is uncertain, but Hindus sing the praises of a warrior god who shattered the fortified cities which lay in his path. The coincidence is striking, but standing high on the citadel mound of Mohenjodaro, it's hard to see how this powerful, long-established city could have been overwhelmed by a band of migrants newly arrived from across the mountains. The mound delivered up just a few skeletons of inhabitants who had suffered a violent end. If an invading enemy did fall upon Mohenjodaro, it must have been late in its history, when the city was already tottering and when the inhabitants were too few and too weak to defend themselves. What other disasters could have brought the Indus civilization to its knees? The Indus seals remind us that jungle animals once lived by the river. Why did animals like the rhinoceros desert the banks of the Indus? Was severe drought the prelude to a change of climate? Was it a long and terrible famine that drove the Indus people to abandon their cities to ruin in a desperate search for food? When considering this possibility, remember that the countryside around Mohenjodaro still supports a farming population who water their crops by irrigation from the creeks of the Indus. The technology is primitive. The materials, rope, pots and wood, were all available in plenty to the Indus farmers. Today, despite an arid climate, the farmers still make a living. Almost certainly, the agriculture of Mohenjodaro was always dependent upon simple methods of irrigation. The river still flows in the dry seasons. So it's unlikely that a change in climate caused the downfall. As the city prospered, a growing population made ever greater demands on the land. Centuries of intensive farming took a heavy toll from the once fertile soil. Failure of the crops with consequent famine may have resulted from a disastrous influx of salt brought to the surface with the rising floodwaters. Evidence of salinity can be seen in the foundations of the city. But recently it has been suggested that the single most important factor in the decline of this great civilization lay in the very bricks from which the city was built. The raw material for bricks is mud, And the method of brick making used in the Indus civilization differs little from that used today. It needs only 2 men to turn out a huge quantity of bricks in a day's work. So there can be no doubt about the capacity of the Indus people to manufacture bricks in the vast numbers needed to keep pace with the expansion of their cities. Indeed, the unique attraction of Mohenjodaro for the archaeologist is the fact that it has survived as a complete city. And the outstanding feature is the quality of its brickwork. Why is it that of all the great cities built by the ancient civilizations, Mohenjodaro alone has survived as a unique example of a complete city community? The answer is simple, and is still to be found within sight of the ruins of the ancient city. Every brick was loaded by hand and carried to the kilns to be slowly baked to a hardness which ensured exceptional lasting qualities. Each kiln held 40,000 bricks, and when filled to the top was ready for firing. And for fuel, they turned to the Indus with its dense jungles along the river banks. Every evening, the carts loaded with timber came rumbling in. Each day, a few more yards of jungle was sacrificed to the hungry brick kilns. As the years passed and the population grew, so the cities expanded. Each year, more bricks, more timber. To bake the bricks in just one small kiln, they must be fired continuously for 3 days, and this consumes 200 cartloads of timber. And one small kiln only contains enough bricks to build one small house. Today, as we look across the site of ancient Mohenjodaro, we see ruins of a whole city which housed a population of many thousands. Millions upon millions of baked bricks were used in the construction of this great city. With the effect of floods and the need to rebuild, the demand for bricks became ever greater, and the search for fuel spread further and further along the riverbanks, employing an ever-increasing labor force simply to keep the wheels turning. The planners and founders of Mohenjodaro were innovators. They could never have guessed the far-reaching and disastrous consequences of building and rebuilding such a great city with baked bricks. In fulfilling their ambition, the builders of the Indus cities broke one of the cardinal rules for survival in a civilized world. They plundered their own environment. As the centuries passed, every scrap of timber for hundreds of miles around them must have been consumed. The natural resources of the Indus Valley literally went up in smoke. Stripped of its protective vegetation, the naked land was desolated by the deadly effects of erosion. The land could no longer meet the demands made upon it by a hungry population. There came a day at last when they started to abandon the city, going in search of new and fertile land. No doubt a few hardy souls remained in the city to the bitter end, hoping that the curse that was upon the land would be lifted. If the city was attacked while it was in this plight, the defenders could offer but the most feeble resistance. The conquerors, finding no food in a barren land, would have no desire to tarry. The empty city was slowly but completely covered by earth. Over the centuries, the soil gradually recovered. The trees and animals returned to hide all signs of man's first brief passage. When he returned to the Indus Valley, it was in search of ancient ghosts beneath this mound of the dead.